We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and CyberReason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at CyberReason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. I have a few announcements before we jump back into our lively discussion. Throughout 2022, that's the year that's about to happen, the Cyber Risk Alliance's Business Intelligence Unit is going to be releasing hot topic research reports based on listeners' surveys for one data point, as well as other research conducted across the industry. Our first report will be coming out sometime early next year, I would assume. It'll be based on third-party risk and supply chain. If you would like to participate in the survey, which will help drive the report, visit securityweekly.com/third-party risk. The results will be shared at a third-party risk e-summit, which is going to be held in January. Also, if you have any specific guest or topic suggestions that you want us to cover on this or any of our shows, you can submit your suggestions by going to securityweekly.com/guests. You will find a form there, fill it out as best you can. We review those forms on the regular, and we'll get back to you if we like your idea and we want to follow through on it. All right. I want to jump back into the discussion, and I wanted to make a few PCI comments before I'm going to turn it back over to Flea, because I know I cut him off when he had a question. Kat, the PA DSS thing leads to, just for your edification, a report on validation as opposed to a report of compliance. And in fact, the PA DSS program is going away, I think, the end of next year. It's being replaced by a more comprehensive, I would say, program, which is just, I always forget what it's called, secure software frame. I think they actually call it the secure software framework. The PCI Council in general has been aware of the impact or the potential impact, as we were talking a little bit about PCI, to small businesses. Very many of them are subject to PCI, as well as the MSPs that support them. The problem that continues, and I'm not sure of a good answer, but the problem that plagues, at least what I'm seeing from the PCI side of the world, is despite the many programs that are in place by the PCI Council to sort of vet and kick the tires of all sorts of manners and levels of third-party service providers, managed service providers, what they generically call third-party or service provider, sometimes there's things that fall through the cracks, and sometimes, whether knowingly or unknowingly, the third-party service providers, managed service providers, will make claims of what they do to help you in terms of PCI compliance, or frankly, the game, it seems these days, is to try to de-scope and eliminate, ease the burden of, simplify, make PCI go away. Which is fine if they're doing it right. Where it becomes problematic is when they make a wrong interpretation of the rules and extend that to their merchant customers, and somebody like me happens to come along as a QSA and is talking to the merchant's customer, and you go through quite a series of, what'd they say? What'd they tell you? What are you doing? What are you not doing? Which may or may not be a problem I'm having with a current customer. At any rate, PCI makes an effort. I do have some questions related to that, but I do want to flip it over to Flea. So, Flea, take it away.
Yeah. Just going back to my question, we're talking about, and appreciate your perspective on the MSPs, Chris. I'm kind of curious, what incentive do MSPs have to actually do a good job, for their clients? And part of the reason why I'm asking that is, often, when you're dealing with these small, medium-sized businesses, especially something that's under 500 people, many of them don't have a security team, much less like even one security professional. Very many of them don't even have an IT team or even technologists on staff. So oftentimes SMBs will be asking for insufficient security or not actually even asking the right thing. And so I'm actually kind of curious, like, what incentive does an MSP have to actually do a better job to make their clients more resilient and to deliver maybe more security than even what the client themselves are actually asking for?
Yeah, Flea. I think first of all, for a lot of MSPs, it can be a competitive differentiator. And if they don't differentiate themselves, someone else will come along will have the capability or the ability to basically persuade the client to say, hey, look, these are the reasons why you need to take these things seriously and you need to step up and pay for these things. And here are the adverse outcomes that could potentially happen if you don't do these things. So I think that's one incentive. I think another incentive is there is a revenue incentive. If you do it right, you can definitely grow your revenue. You can grow your bottom line revenue, and that's a great incentive as well. And I think another one obviously is that if something does go sideways or goes wrong, if you're doing things the right way and you can demonstrate that, because you're not going to have control over everything. And that's one of the first things you need to recognize. You need your client to recognize, if the client comes in one day and plugs something into the network, it does something bad. I mean, you can only go as far as you can to control those things. But the point is if you're doing those right things, you can demonstrate those right things. And, if the proverbial poop hits the fan, you have the ability to defend yourself. That's very important. Came up earlier about MSPs and contracts and that type of thing. And, a few years ago on cyber claims, a lot of the carriers really didn't care whether or not the MSPs were at fault or not, unless it was something really bad. From backups is a good example. I mean, there were so many cases back then where just backups weren't being done and the clients were paying the MSPs for managing their backups and stuff, and it just wasn't being done. And back then, the carriers just saw it as being very expensive and not worth the effort to go after the MSPs or, like I said, to subrogate against the MSPs policy to get some type of reimbursement. Today, that's a different deal. Today, those questions come up all the time. And the cyber carrier says, I want to see the contract with your MSP. I want to see the things that your MSP was responsible for, because we need to determine what we can do, to get part of this money back that we're having to pay out on this claim. And the reason for that is there's just many more claims, and the claims, the payments that are being done on the claims are astronomically higher than they were, 2-3 years ago. And so that's a huge incentive. And I think the last incentive I would say is, I think MSPs have done a great job industry at proving that people can outsource their IT. And they've done that very well. And I think overall the industry still has good credibility. But I think that credibility has been tarnished, for a better word, over the last 2 years, just because there's been so many issues with MSPs not doing the job. I mean, a lot of things, quite frankly, have been the MSP's fault. I mean, backups are a big one. We still have today where a server wasn't being backed up because somebody forgot to check the box, or, the security was ridiculously weak, on the backups. And so a lot, or firewalls haven't been upgraded in a year and that type of stuff. And so I think that the larger incentive here is for MSPs to say, look, if we want our industry to survive and thrive, and we want to continue for people to look at us as being the experts from IT, we're going to need to step up and do these right things, and basically facing these threats that are coming our way, coming our SMBs way, and do the right thing.
Chris, you've mentioned insurance more than one time, and I kind of, it sparked an idea in my head, because we're talking about PCI. And one of the reasons why PCI was so successful and why PCI existed is that there were all these card holding brands that had a huge incentive, right, to actually control the risk, because they would lose money if somebody got compromised. I feel like there's actually something similar with regards to actually insurance providers who are actually, now offering cyber insurance. And I wonder, how would you feel about something that was led by the insurance industry to kind of create almost these certifications for MSPs to say, hey, these MSPs, adhere to our guidance or yada yada yada. I'm just trying to actually say PCI to eventually actually hear that bell. But I'm actually kind of curious, like, about this idea of like, hey, industry actually self-regulating as opposed to hoping that the government gives regulation or gives good regulation.
Well, Flea, I mean, this is a subject that's come up a lot lately. And when I was there in Orlando last week, surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of MSPs, it's a really big deal. And I'll tell you, the main reason is MSPs today are finding it more difficult to even find a carrier to cover them. I mean, if you want to talk about the highest risk industry out there, and probably on the radar from insuring, the MSPs are up there, right? Because it's a one-to-many deal. You hit one MSP, you get a bunch. And so they're a huge target. And they have lots of, I tell people, I came from the banking world. We hosted all our own stuff. We hosted our own internet banking. We drove our own ATMs. I mean, we had our own wire system. I mean, those were super powerful applications that we had to secure. None of those, in my opinion, applications are as destructive or high risk as an RMM. Especially the more endpoints you have under. I mean, that RMM can do massive damage, on a massive scale, and so the carriers understood that, and they learned it the hard way, right? They learned it with the claims, and so you think, okay, what you insurance industry carrier wise, can you guys all get together, similar to what PCI did, the payment card industry? Can you guys get together and maybe do those types of things? I think that would be great, but the insurance industry is very, very old and very, very big, and there are so many players, small, medium, and large, in that space. That is a big ask. You're asking a lot of people that historically have competed against one another, whatever the case may be. Yes, and in some cases they work together because they underwrite together, but you're asking them to do that. That's a tough ask. The other thing I would say is you also have to understand how policies are being sold. The carriers themselves are not the ones selling the policies; the brokers are, right? And so you may have brokers that are specialized in cyber, but for the most part, brokers are not. So if you're going to sell a policy out via a broker, you're going to have to expect the broker to kind of understand this stuff and do those types of things, and that's a pretty tough ask. But I think there is a solution, and I think that we're starting to see some movement in the MSP industry and by some of the MSP software leaders out there to try to push that along. Maybe to say, hey, look, insurance industry, if you can't come up with something, let us come up with something from the MSP side. Can you guys agree if an MSP is doing these, 20, 25, whatever the list is, things, and they can demonstrate that on an ongoing basis? Will you then consider or go ahead and write a policy for them? Or maybe, that, because today's world, it's not about lower premiums on the MSP side. It's about just getting a policy. So now will you kind of open your eyes a little bit bigger? Will you be more open to doing policies if we can put some things in place from an industry perspective? So, Flea, I think you're right. It has to be industry driven. I just don't think the insurance industry is going to be the driver of that. It's going to be more the MSP industry that's going to turn around and convince the insurance industry, here's what we're doing. These are the good things we're doing, kind of like PCI. Would you accept that? And if you do accept that, we can demonstrate that your risk is going to be much lower for writing these policies, and therefore write these providers these policies so they can at least get the coverage they need.
I'm not buying it. I'm just trying to think in my head, how's that even going to work?
If you think about it, though, the PCI industry, like, they face the same challenges. Bunch of credit card companies in competition with one another, various players at various levels. Like, I don't know, it could happen.
I think it can happen. It's just going to take a little bit longer. And I think what's going to happen is there's going to be MSPs that are going to do it. There's going to be MSPs that don't. There's going to be some consolidation as a result of that. It's not going to take place overnight, though. So, hey, Jeff, I definitely understand your doubt on this side of things. It's a monster undertaking, but I think the MSP industry has a better chance of doing it than the insurance industry does.
Well, it doesn't make much sense to argue about hypotheticals. How hard is it going to be? But I was curious to your thoughts, since one part of your business is doing a lot of forensics work. So it's sort of a two-part question. To the degree that you're able and you're comfortable, I'm certainly not looking for sensitive private information to be shared, but I'm curious as to if you have a rough sense of what percentage of what percentage of SMBs represented by your client base have a PCI obligation anyway. That's part of the business. And then the sort of the flip side of it, where you might have to choose your words carefully, is in your forensic work, are there particular things that you see sort of all the time, a top 3, top 5 list of root cause issues, or at least the symptomatic things that caused whatever you're investigating in the first place? You can, if you can list any, I suspect that we will be able to tie them back to a PCI requirement. But so what percentage is PCI anyway, and what goes wrong all the time, and maybe we can tie that back to PCI.
So what's interesting about the people that we deal with is very small number are PCI. And when the ones that are basically don't handle any transactions, they don't store any information whatsoever. They may have a website, but that totally goes to another website before any of that information is captured or anything like that. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, it's a good question, but we just don't have that many people. And I don't know if it's one of the things that over time they figured out different ways, like you said, to maybe reduce that risk or reduce the need. But we've had some, right? We've had some.
Well, let me ask the question in a different way, because I mean,
Sure.
If they're small and all they have is a website and it's outsourced to a third party, that means they have a PCI obligations. PCI simply it comes into play if they're a business and they're collecting revenue, if they're a nonprofit taking contributions, if they're a business that's selling something and they accept credit cards, debit cards, payment cards in any way, shape, or form, that puts them under the PCI umbrella. The alternative, how do you accept contributions and payments and things like that if it's not by credit card? That's how I would draw the line at the highest level. So so the question is, how many of your clients accept credit cards in any way, shape, or form for goods and services, regardless of who they've farmed it off to, that responsibility?
And not too many. A lot of them do ACH payments. ACH payments and wires seems like the predominant. And I think a lot of it, when we get feedback about that, has nothing to do with PCI. It has to do with they see as paying the credit card fees as high. So that's what it comes down to. But they have similar risk, right? Business email compromise, account numbers are a big deal. We had business email compromises in the past where payroll information was the stuff that was compromised. Attackers got in, figured out how to submit forms to HR for people to change their direct deposit, and boom, they're off to the races. And so they have similar things, right? And so, and then I would say the biggest one, outside of payments that we have is obviously HIPAA. And that's the most, I would say, for people that have to deal with payments, they're more aware of PCI than SMBs related to healthcare aware of HIPAA, if that makes sense, right? You get on these people and you get in these situations where they've been compromised, and very rarely do they have a true compliance person like they're supposed to have. And when they do, you're having to educate them on stuff around HIPAA that you would think, it being around for a significant amount of time, they would already know. And they don't. And so when you're having to do forensics, explain to them why you have to do forensics and the purposes of doing it. The thing I always explain on the HIPAA side of things is you're guilty until proven innocent. If you don't have the forensics there to prove that they didn't take data or access data, then guess what? You have to assume that they accessed and took data. And so I think your question, even though I'm kind of tweaking it a little bit, is a good one, because a lot of people that may be doing things, whether it's payment card, HIPAA, or whatever, in the SMB space, absolutely have no clue on what that means until they actually get compromised.
Right. Yeah, and I certainly see that as a problem. Like I said at the beginning of this segment, the providers, the MSPs and things that are similar are not necessarily, even though there are a lot of programs within PCI for them to fall into line, very often they're unaware of what they're subject to, what they should be doing. They just we'll cover you on PCI, and just give us money, and we'll provide the service. And really, frankly, there's outside of these specific programs that Kat mentioned, where there's a lot of caveats for where you fall outside of having to do that. Unfortunately, there's really not any oversight. One of the many problems, nuances, tweaks that PCI still needs to do, which for the most part they're aware of, and they're taking attempts to do it. I had another question. In terms of the findings that you see from forensics, out of curiosity, and I'm not even leading this anywhere, this is just a curiosity, how often are the things that you find are the causes of the incidents on the extreme end? Somebody found an O-Day and launched it against your customer, your client, versus they're just not doing some of the basic things, whether it's patching, configuration mismanagement, weak passwords, shared passwords, and so on and so forth. Any rough ideas what the breakdown is?
Great. It's the majority of the basic stuff. I tell people when I talk about this a lot, these guys aren't using what I say James Bond style tactics to get in, right? This is basic stuff. Firewall vulnerabilities that are well publicized. I'm not throwing shade at SonicWall. I'm just saying SonicWall has had a lot of stuff. They make it well known. I mean, you have to be living in a cave not to know that those vulnerabilities were out there. And I don't know how many cases we had where there was an MSP at play that just didn't update the darn firewall, right? The Exchange stuff, those were 0 days. And those were a lot of us like to refer to them as negative days because they were actively being exploited even before they were being published. And, those people got hit, but there was no damage to the majority of people, but it was the people that didn't do anything about it months later. We had a lot of people that they patched their Exchange servers, but they didn't go back and remove the web shells, or they didn't go back to say, hey, look, what the heck was going on during that time so I could even find out if something bad or good happened. None of that stuff was happening. It's super, super basic stuff. VPN, no MFA, passwords haven't been changed in forever. Well, the CEO doesn't want to change his password, so we haven't changed his password in 5 years, that type of stuff. None of this really sophisticated stuff is out there.
Yeah, which is what I suspected your answer would be. And this is something that's a recurring theme on our show and the main show, and has been as long as I've been affiliated, which is going on 6 or 7 years now. Does the not to go too much off base, but I was actually at a gathering last night with former colleagues, what we call an NSA Information Assurance Alumni Group, and a lot of our conversation, we try to get, we haven't gotten together in the last 2 years. This was our first in-person gathering in quite a while, but we keep track on a mailing list. And one of the discussion points last night was, how NSA and CISA or the DHS more generically, what role do they need to be playing? What can they be doing to provide security to our nation, especially in terms of critical infrastructure, protecting against the plethora of ransomware attacks, defeating the adversaries, whether they're coming, nation state level, coming from Russia or China or North Korea or whomever. And part of me just sits back and thinks, I have very often heard in this, at least in the hacker security side of the community, the last couple of years, this disdain and for government involvement, the Big Brother aspect of NSA and things like that, and the general let's keep government at arm's length. But then with all the ransomware attacks that have been happening over the last year or so, and all the attacks against infrastructure, it was I can't keep track of all the Florida water treatment facility back in what month, and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden everybody's like, well, there's no other solution except for regulation, except for getting the government involved. It just seems to be a weird, I'm not even sure the right word for it, juxtaposition, but I overall get this sense that for the most part, most companies, especially the smaller ones, are really sort of at the mercy of somebody else has got to help us. Somebody else has got to do something for us, whether it's us engaging an MSP or us looking to the government to intercede for us in one way, shape, or form. I think we're going to be having this discussion for quite a while, I guess, is my bottom line. Any thoughts along those lines? Whether I personally think most organizations that fall into the bucket should just look to PCI because it's been out there long enough. Very often they have to follow it anyway, versus some other form of government regulation where there's a certain amount of disdain and buy-in and PR that has to be associated with it. Any sort of summary thoughts along those lines, Chris?
Yeah. So number one is, when we have to interface with law enforcement, historically the FBI gets involved in the majority of cases, but we've had a lot lately where it seems like the Secret Service is getting involved. And one of the things, and I mean, working with those agents, it's a very pleasant experience, right? They're very cooperative and all those types of things. And they want a lot of data to help them try to fight these guys. But that distrust thing kind of comes in to say, look, what are you going to do with this data outside of this investigation? And so I don't think that's like vocalized, but that's what it is. And when attorneys are involved, obviously they're doing things in the best interest of their clients. So they're going to give the FBI, kind of the minimum stuff, but they're not going to hand over, like they're not necessarily going to be ready to have the FBI come in and take the server and go make images of it and do whatever the heck they want with it. It just doesn't make any sense. And so if I had to choose, I would say, look, the NSA, the FBI, the Secret Service, the agents assigned to do these things, they have a job to do and they're trying to do it. But I don't necessarily know that that's helpful to the SMB directly. I mean, when you've seen, conversations where between U.S. and Russia, and the U.S. says, President Biden says, hey, look, Vladimir Putin, these 13 industries or whatever the number is, make sure your hackers don't touch these. Doesn't make any sense to me. Like, no, don't touch anybody over here would be kind of my sense. And so that's one thing. But the SMBs are just getting killed. I mean, and people are like, well, why doesn't Russia do anything? Well, why would they? I mean, you have billions of dollars coming outside of the U.S. flowing into the pockets of Russians. Doesn't matter if they're criminals or whatever. It's flowing into that country. So there's no incentive one way or another for the Russians to do anything about it. And so I would like to see, and I'm not for any more government than we have, but I would like to see something just truly focused on SMB, like some type of government SMB cyber force that's not rolls up under the umbrella of one of these larger agencies, that they have their own funding, they get their own right priorities. I mean, that's super blue sky. I get it. But I just don't think the SMBs will right now. I have, there is no hope that there's actually somebody out there with the SMB's interest at heart in dealing with this type of stuff, or we would have things already stopped by now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've had similar types of conversations like this in many venues with many different people over the years, and it usually boils down to, especially from the vendor side of things, there's no money in it. Why should we do it? Because we're a money-making organization, and that's how we measure success. And that's really the toughest nut to crack is how do we make this appealable and do more for more organizations when there's no incentive based on the usual things that incentivize most of the world, which is generating revenue. Final question from me, and just to get your thoughts on it. Something I was thinking about during the course of of our discussion today is a lot of the things that you mentioned are the responsibilities very often taken on by MSPs. The things we've certainly talked about, the basic hygiene that companies are falling down on and don't have the facility themselves to manage. An argument could be made that most of that stuff isn't really security at all. It's certainly security related, but it's really a function of IT, a function of administration of networks and systems and applications and so on and so forth. Do you see any benefit, any way, good reason to sort of change the tact and try to talk about, rather than mention cybersecurity or security, which scares everybody and makes them bristle and say we have no budget for it, but just sort of refocus the conversation on just how to do your job better, your IT job better, and mention silly little things like basic hygiene, but just don't call it security so it doesn't freak people out. And maybe somehow slowly we train small companies to, oh, you're just talking about me making a stronger password because it'll make my job easier. Yeah, I could do that. I could install a patch because it makes my job easier. Oh yeah, I can do that. I don't know. Any thoughts along those lines? Am I pipe
I try to
dreaming?
steer. No, you're not pipe dreaming. I think you're on the same. When I have conversations, especially with SMBs or with any organizations that are or people that aren't technical, I really try to put it in terms of saying, hey, look, it's the same thing as managing your finances here, right? I mean, you're not gonna just sit back and give somebody all the financial power outside of your company and say, hey, we trust you, do whatever you think is right with our money. You're going to be involved in that. You're going to want to know all the different metrics and things that are going well to manage your business. And so I just say the same thing. I try not to say, hey, look, you got to install a bunch of fancy stuff and spend a bunch of money. I'm just saying, look, you want your business to survive. You want to avoid these unforeseen expenses. You want to do the things that are right, and you want to keep things operational. These are the things you can do, and you're right. And we try to put those in simple terms, like, hey, MFA is one that gets misunderstood a lot. I mean, people just do a bad job of explaining MFA to people, and people think, holy crap, I'm going to have to sit here and punch something on my phone or do some code or answer the call or something every single time. And that's not necessarily the case today with MFA. I mean, there's behavior and there's rules in place with MFA that doesn't make it onerous, and unless people do their jobs the same way that they did, a year ago, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. So you're right. If you can put it in terms and not try to just pound them over the head with some massive security manifesto or something of that nature, you're definitely going to get things. And I do think that there are things there are manageable chunks to do. And so if you come in with a list of 100 things, say you got to do these tomorrow, you're dead in the water, that's not going to work. But if you explain things more in business terms, and just like you said, if you can say things, hey, this is going to make your job easier. If you do this thing, if you can come up with ways that truly implement security controls, improve security, and figure out a way where it makes the business thrive or their operations thrive. Yes, that's definitely the type of messaging we want to see out there to get people to buy in, because you're not going to convince a small company that has no somebody standing over them to do 800-171. You're just not going to do that. They're going to have buyer's remorse forever. But you can explain things in a better way to get them to do some things that just make sense to their business to manage the risk.
So in light of that, I guess just looking back at the CISA document guidance, which is what drove this conversation. I mean, I don't disagree with anything that's in it. I think it's fairly succinct, and I would guess that they would think it's simplified, and taking something like as an example, PCI DSS or 800-171 or 853, which are huge volumes of requirements and controls, down to 2 pages. I'm sure somebody thought, wow, we've done a really great job here. But when you read them specifically, I know what they're talking about, but gosh, this has got to sound onerous to people that read this that really don't have any background in security. They're just looking for, just tell me what to do. Give me the very simple checkbox or steps even to, how do I accomplish this, that, or the other. I don't know. I'm intrigued about, based on our conversation, of maybe, coming up with a way to share the basics without, letting people know that they're actually doing security basics. I might have to add that to my arsenal of Jedi mind tricks or something. Anyway, any parting thoughts for us, Chris? Any last things you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would just say for the MSPs out there, I mean, keep abreast, stay on top of things. Don't let the balls drop. It's not difficult to do the right things and stay on top of things. All it takes is one blunder, and things can go sideways pretty quickly. I could do a mini series on examples of that. And I would say for SMBs out there, look, and I use this term, don't trust your MSP. And what I mean by it is that's no foul on the MSPs. What I'm saying is, as an SMB, you need to be aware of what your MSP is doing for you, and you need to make sure that they're doing their job right. And I think the MSPs that are good out there will appreciate that. You can't go assuming things are going well, your backups are working, and those types of things, unless you have things in place or times where you have those conversations and ask those questions and ask for evidence. And if you do that, you keep in check. I mean, your MSP is maybe the most critical vendor you have, and you need to treat them as such. And again, if a sign of a good MSP is if they're welcome to that type of scrutiny and they can deliver under that scrutiny, that's going to be a good MSP. So that's what I would part today's call with.
Great. And I have to throw one more vote towards PCI, and just based on exactly what you were saying just now, in terms of not trusting your MSP, or at least make sure you understand what they're doing, what they're not doing, and make sure they understand what they're doing and what they're not doing in terms of your security. PCI embraced that several versions ago. In fact, all the way back in 2013, when they first released version 3 of the standard, they required you as an organization, as a merchant, presumably, to keep track of, if you're I'm paraphrasing, if you're outsourcing to all these other companies, these third parties, make sure you have some sort of matrix, make sure you have it documented who's doing what in terms of all the security controls. It's taken a while to embrace that, obviously, but that acknowledgement, at least in the PCI world, has been around for a while. Anyway, I appreciate Chrissy joining us today and leading this conversation. It's a fascinating conversation, one that I think we're going to keep having as an industry for years to come. Keep up the good fight. Keep doing what you're doing and helping out those that you can. Appreciate what you do for the industry. Liam, thanks for the suggestion. And that's going to wrap us for this week. Next week, tune in. We're going to have back John Threat, who was on our show, I think back in February, episode 62, if I'm not mistaken. He reached out to me a little while ago, and he has a bee in his bonnet, and he wants to talk something out on air with us. So I will leave that as a teaser, but do come back next week and join us as we talk to John Threat for a second time. That's going to wrap us for this week. Stay compliant, stay secure, and we'll see you next week.